You know, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, when the calamity receives you. And this is why the believer's iman grows. Why does it grow? Because he's seeing Allah's promise being fulfilled. You know, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ قالوا هذا ما وعدنا الله ورسوله وصدق الله ورسوله وما زادهم إلا إيمانا وتسليما. And when I first read this ayah, I was confused. How did this calamity increase them in iman? Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying, when the believers saw the enemy of Allah come to them in the battle of Al-Khandaq, the battle of the ditch, 10,000 of al-mushrikeen came to Al-Madinah. والصحابة رضي الله عنهم, Allah Azza wa Jalla describes their state in the Quran. وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرِ. Their hearts had reached their throat out of fear from the enemy. Even to the point where one of them wanted to go to relieve himself. It was a mission and it was a very difficult, fearful matter. This is the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. And this is an army of 10,000 that is prepared. And the believers are not as prepared as the disbelievers that had come. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He described the believers in the Quran. He said, وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ. When the believers saw the 10,000 army of Kuffar Quraysh coming to them, and indeed this is a calamity. This is a huge calamity. You're seeing death in your eyes. رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ. What did the believers do? They stood there and they said, هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. They looked at each other and they said, this is exactly what Allah and His Messenger promised us. They promised that Allah Azza wa Jalla will be testing us with these matters. هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. Then they looked at each other and they said, وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. Allah and His Messenger have spoken the truth. What was the result? وَمَا زَادَهُمْ إِلَّا إِيمَانًا. And their iman only increased. Why did their iman increase? Not because they saw the disbelievers. Their iman increased because they've seen Allah's promise being fulfilled. Right? وَمَا زَادَهُمْ إِلَّا إِيمَانًا وَتَسْلِيمًا. And it only increased them in submission to Allah Azza wa Jalla. So during the calamity, they never forgot the obedience of Allah. They never forgot to be submitting to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Today, when someone goes through a calamity, he loses his deen altogether. And he keeps away from the obligations and the commands. And that this is not an example of what is required from the believer. The worst thing a person can do during a calamity is to disobey Allah Azza wa Jalla. Such a person did not read the message right. The only correct thing that needs to be done during a calamity is for a person to remain steadfast upon the worship of Allah Azza wa Jalla and upon the commands and the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is not going to come easy. This will come for a person who knows to submit to Allah Azza wa Jalla in times of ease. And then when the difficulty comes, Allah Azza wa Jalla gives him that strength and that motivation to continue to worship Him during the calamity. Even this is why Allah Azza wa Jalla would say, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ, in order to prepare us for what is to come. My brothers and sisters in Islam, when a person is faced with a calamity, there's no doubt he needs to exercise patience. And patience is a high level of iman. In fact, patience is half of iman. And the other half of iman is shukr, gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the believer's affairs are between these two matters. You're either in a moment of your life in where you're supposed to exercise patience, or you're either in a moment in your life where you're supposed to exercise shukr and gratitude to Allah Azza wa Jalla. And your affairs revolve around these two matters. And at times both these matters at the same time. When ulama rahimahumullah spoke in depth and a lot about patience. And patience is supposed to be exercised in three matters. Upon the worship of Allah. So when you worship Allah Azza wa Jalla, that requires patience. And avoiding sins, you also require patience. It requires patience when you see some desire, when you see a sin, and you want to approach and you want to commit this sin, and your desire is dragging you towards it, it requires patience to keep away from it. And the final matter that requires patience is the calamities and the pains and the difficulties of life.